without feeling like I have to stand behind the pulpit. It feels like more of a class today, so just to walk you through some of what we have going on here. And so just bear with me here. But I do want to paint a picture, and thank you, Tim, for that. I do want to paint a picture of where we're at look back at Crosspointe the last several years, back at last year, and try to take a pulse, if you will, of what we are, or what we're feeling in the congregation. I reached out to several of you and kind of got some feedback, and so I hope to be able to maybe paint a picture of where we're at, some of the challenges we're facing. I don't know if you were like me, but 2 Sundays ago, when we had the fellowship meal and Paul's appreciation dinner, it felt like, okay, life might be able to get back to normal. It just felt really good. Some more energy we felt here at church. And that piece of it is what I'm feeling. And everyone is just tired of this last year. We feel that this last year, I think the pandemic, and I'm not, it is real. I'm not doubting that. But we are hurting as a church tremendously because of the pandemic and what's happened. We're not meant to be socially distant from people. We're not meant to disconnect from others. That's not how we live our Christian life. And we're hurting. And what I'd like to do is just push into some of those topics today. So bear with me as we go through, and then we'll just move on here. Every year since 1934, the president, and before that, it was called the annual meeting, where they were just read to the joint session of Congress. But every year since 1934, the president gives a State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress. In it, he discusses current challenges and the purpose behind the year's administrative agenda. And since 2016, the pastoral team at Crosspointe has suggested that we give an annual State of the Church address. Now, we have different focus here. It's not to say that the pastors are setting all the agenda and we want to set the course and everybody better just follow in line. That's not what we're saying. We are congregationalists. We do want to know, but this is based on feedback. This is based on small movements throughout. Very seldom when we are in life do we make drastic changes like 180s that'll change the rest of your life. There's points in it, but most of us will make these little decision points, and we'll get to a place where we curve toward movements, if you will. And that's where us as a church we have been moving toward different areas, and I'd like to look at some of those. After the State of the Union, the opposition always gives a rebuttal, and we won't go there this year. But I do trust that we can at least have a conversation. But I do like what Paul was saying this morning, and that whole conversation of being able to talk from. One of the things that I love at Crosspointe, and I don't know, this may be true in other places, my experience, of course, is here, but the fact that we can bring up a controversial subject like conspiracy theories, and we can talk about them openly in church. That's a blessing. And what better place to be able to do that than right here? A safe place. And so I want to just bless you for that. So if there is something today or tonight that you would like to push back on, feel free to raise your hand or message me or text me or call me or connect with me and say, look, that's not my experience. And so we'd like to, while we won't do a formal rebuttal here, while we do want to open up and have interaction. What I'd like to do is reflect back on the past years and the founding vision. So we'll go way back. I know it's 8 years. It feels like and I don't want to just focus on the past, but we do want to look back and say, are we still carrying out that founding vision? I also like to reflect back on this last year and the challenges that we faced as a congregation. Some major challenges we faced. It felt like a lot of things we had planned to do, we just kind of put on hold. Some of the things we had done took all year to do versus several weeks, what we normally do. And we also like to review the membership and attending numbers and what growth or decline may mean or require. So we'll look at those numbers, and then we'll make some reality, maybe give us a reality check of what we'll need to be doing here. We'll try to take a pulse of our congregational life, and then also propose and lay out some changes and objectives for the next year. And these are not going to be new. These are things we talk about, but we'd like to make sure that we're all on the same page moving forward. I just put it in as review, evaluate, and plan. Review, we're going to review the founding vision and review major points in 2020. I want to evaluate current membership numbers, current church culture, kind of like a SWOT analysis, the strength, the areas that we need to pay attention to, maybe some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that we have looking forward. I also want it to be an inspirational talk. It is a little bit difficult to be able to make talks like this inspirational and drawing us to something higher. But my intent is that we do at least try to see ourselves where we see, try to look at where we see ourselves in the bigger picture of Crosspoint and say, what are we doing? What am I doing here in this work? It's like Paul was saying when he talked about the conspiracy theories. There is so much work to be done in the kingdom. Let's not waste our energies into do things that don't really matter. Do things that we can't change anyway. Let's channel those resources. We can make a difference. And then, of course, plan, look at some of the leadership development that needs to be taken care of, and then also the outreach congregations that we have in mind here. Why are you at Crosspoint? Why? So, what keeps you from seeking fellowship elsewhere? Last time I checked, we don't bring you in, lock the door, and make sure you stay here. You can go anywhere you want. You're adults, and you can go anywhere. Love to hear a little bit of feedback. What about Crosspoint attracted you to come in the first place? There was 42 charter members, and so most of you came after we had been started. So what was it that attracted you? Relationships? Leadership? Safe place? Small groups? Flat church? Friends here? Vision? So I love these. I love what I'm hearing. But are we actually pushing into those areas enough that they'll be here for us in 5 years from now? Are our discipleship groups, our small groups that are a huge part of what we're doing, are they doing well? Are there the friends that brought you here or the relationships you had with people here, is that enough to keep you here? Many of us, it was logistics as well. So we think, we knew someone there, and that's where we went to church, and that's where we found ourselves pulled in. But I would want to say to all of you, the fact that you are here and that you're a part of this congregation today, whether you're a member or attending or being here, it is part of God's will for your life that you're here. And because it's a part of God's will for your life, whatever that looks like, we need your help. The church needs you. If we don't see ourselves as being needed in the work of God, then we're going to see church as this place to come, get what I need, go home, do my life, and I come back next Sunday. We need you here. The kingdom of God is much bigger than just that. Does what attracted you to come initially still hold true? Maybe it's part of the vision that was here. Is our vision still strong? Is it pushing forward? Maybe it was the desire to have a discipleship base or discipleship model for church administration. Is that still moving forward? Are we holding true to the mission and core values that led us to start Crosspoint? And if not, then we need to make some adjustments. So let's push into it. Do you feel the same connection to the mission, vision, and core values as was indicated in new members class? I think sometimes we as pastors get to review that whole section several times a year when we teach new members class, and most of you don't. I'm guessing majority of you here haven't read or pushed through those since you become a member. I'm not saying that to diss anyone. I'm just saying we don't push into those things enough, and so those are things that we'd really like to push at. One of the things I'd like to really push into as well is the fact that if the mission at Crosspoint is small enough, you've heard of the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the people do nothing and 20% of the people do 80% of the work. If the work at Crosspoint is so small that 20% of our people can do the work, then we are shooting way too low. Sorry about that. Then we are shooting way too low. We have got to have a vision that stretches us. And if you're not being stretched, then you're not plugging in. And if you're not plugging in, then recognize that no one's fault except your own. The work of the kingdom is big enough that we can push forward. One of the early tenets of Anabaptism is their insistence on the return to a priesthood of all believers. So what had happened throughout the years, the Catholic Church had this hierarchy of leadership and church leadership, and they did all the work, and you came to church, you made your confessions, you went to Mass, you went home, you lived your life, you came back. That was all that you really interacted with. And the early Anabaptists said, we need to go back to the early church, which said that there should be a priesthood of all believers. In 1 Peter 2, verse 5, it says, ye also, as lively stones, are built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. But if you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. The Old Testament, the only access to God was through the priest. We now have that access. And so we're not here as a body of believers gathering together so that we can have access to God. It's not here in church here where we have access to God. It is here where we come together. We have access to God everywhere. But it's here we come together to synergize our energies and to be equipped for the work of the kingdom. And if, like I say, if the work of the kingdom the work at Crosspoint is not big enough that we need everyone, then our vision needs to be much bigger. And I think we need to push into that. We have equal access to God. What we seldom talk about is the need for everyone to be every member in ministry. Take a minute to just simply evaluate, am I doing what I need to be doing at Crosspoint? We'll look back at this whole idea. Now we go back to review. Some of you have seen this. Many of you may have not. So when we first started Crosspoint, we talked about the whole desire to be a discipleship model of church administration. And we had talked about the fact that this is as opposed to a regulation base. Not saying that we don't have some regulation, some structure, but recognizing that we are not trying to have a church that is regulation based. We can't build walls high enough to keep everybody in church. It's a volunteer organization, and that's not what we want to do. So we have to have discipleship in place where that teaches a principle so that we can move forward. And it's not necessarily, I remember comments like we don't necessarily want to leave everything we're doing, but we want to focus less on the regulation and much more on the discipleship. And so that's what we've been attempting to do at Crosspoint. We also knew that doing that would be very, very dangerous. Why is that? Because we've become accustomed to, when people come to our church, one of the first questions many of them ask is, so what can we do here? What are the things that we're allowed to do here? We have become accustomed as a people to try to look to the church to set our parameters. That's how we live our Christian life. I'm allowed to do this, and so it must be okay. Well, guess what? The pastors at Crosspoint don't have this insight that we all of a sudden know what you can do in order to be right with God. That's not why we have our church regulation. It's not there so that you actually to keep you from going to hell. That's not the point. We're saying together as a brotherhood, we work together and we disciple each other, and this is how we as a church work together. The word I'd like to use is intentionality. I'm not saying that you can't be a Christian and do things different than we do here. But if we do things without being intentional in how we do them, we're going to be like every other church out there in our community that we say that we're trying to actually change the model. If the focus is on regulation, it becomes authoritarian and legalistic. That's not what we're looking to do. We said we don't really want that. But we also looked at the Protestant focus and said if the focus is a principle alone, it becomes Protestantism and cheap grace. The idea that you're now a Christian, do what you want, you're a son of God or a child of God. It's more than that. So what we've simply said is we connect discipleship and the principle together. We have these principles, we teach on them, we disciple each other, we talk together, and we work through this. That's brotherhood. And if we can connect these two together, that is at the core of Anabaptism. And it's not just me saying that. If you look at the 5 cores of Anabaptism, as in Harold Bender The first three come from Harold Bender's book, The Anabaptist Vision. He says, the essence of Christianity is discipleship. The transformation of life patterned after the teaching and example of Jesus Christ. We say we do want to follow the Bible. Don't hear me say that we don't follow the Bible. But the reality is the Bible takes us to Jesus Christ, and Jesus' example is what we're trying to follow. So we're following the example of Jesus Christ. And that's what discipleship is. It says, how would Jesus act in this case? How would we react to each other? That's discipleship. We challenge each other. The next core value here is the church's brotherhood, voluntary membership. Remember, so when they, back in the 1400s, when they were starting, if you were in a country that had Protestant leadership, you were a Protestant. If you were in a country that had the Catholic leadership, you were a Catholic. And so you're born there, you're baptized as an infant, that's who you are. You're a Christian depends on where you're born. And they're simply said, that's not the way we do things. We have volunteer membership. And that's what I'm saying. If you're at Crosspointe, it's because God wants you here and you've chosen to be here. Voluntary membership based on conversion, believers' baptism, and commitment to discipleship and holy living. The ethic of love and non-resistance. And this is a piece that we talk about a lot. But this ethic of love and non-resistance, it cannot just be pacifism. It is this suffering love that we say we will rather die than hurt someone. Complete abandonment of war, strife, not just war, strife, taking of human life, a refusal to use violence and force of any kind to get our own way. That in sharp contrast to what's going on in the political world right now. These three are highlighted in Bender's Anabaptist Vision. The other ones that I'd like to look at that I think in just the tenors that I see is biblicism. What does the Bible say? A desire to get back to early church practice. We do that at one of the things that we did at church here is when we looked at church administration, we said we wanted a flat church, but we also see that there's two church offices. And so we push back against this idea of hierarchy where we have multiple ordinations and we have this hierarchy of who's up here. Not to say that those aren't okay, we're just simply saying, is that what the Bible lays out? That's what we attempt to do. We're trying to say, what does the Bible say? And let's get to there as close as we can. A compelling vision for the Great Commission. And this is, although it's the core of Anabaptism as you look back in early Anabaptism, it was at the core of the early church. Modern day Anabaptists have lost this vision, especially in the last 100 years. There is a sense of the cultural walls we have put up have done more damage to our churches and more damage to the people that we aren't trying to reach than anything else. So we need to be careful, though, in how we interact there. When we started the discipleship groups, we said, and these are exact slides that we used because I wanted to make sure that we're getting what we're trying to do here. This was back in 2018. 2 key points to understand before moving ahead. We said that discipleship groups are a major shift to a different way of having church, not only for close social fellowship, although this too. So the major shift. The one is it's way different in how we're going to do church. The biggest change in shifting spiritual discipleship, fellowship, prayer, Bible study, and nurture to small groups meeting weekday and Sunday mornings. That is, we're simply saying that we were recognizing that Sunday morning and Sunday evening are not those we're struggling to have people come. We're struggling to bring meaning to them. And we're saying we're going to actually pause all those and we're going to go to discipleship groups. Sunday morning will be the only time we assemble together except for special services. That was the first point. The second key point was discipleship groups will work only if we're committed to faithful attendance. And I'll say this for you discipleship group leaders, they'll only work if you have meetings. If you're not having meetings twice a month, we are failing. Just that simple. We're not going to survive as a church. There is no way that we will sit together, we will be able to survive moving forward if we're not meeting regularly. Meeting on weekday and Sunday evenings is an area of weakness for us. Are we adequately prepared to make this level of commitment? We're just simply saying, if we're going to do church, if we want community, we're going to have to get together. And if we're not getting together, it's not going to work. The success of Crosspoint's discipleship will depend on this. And I'm simply saying, that's what we said as a church. Let's take our pulse. How are we doing? Pretty big gamble, but I'm convinced it's worth it. I am convinced that discipleship is crucial for the success of our church, and I want you to be convinced of it as well. If you're not meeting with someone older and being mentored, or meeting with someone younger and helping them, then you need to look for someone. You look for someone to mentor. Look for someone to be mentored. It's the way we grow as people, by being stretched and pushed and made to think. This will push into the major points in 2020. And so these are the ones. I took the slide from last year, and I just copied and pasted right into this slideshow. And so we say, look, how are we doing? All right, lead pastor transition. We started that in January with the whole challenge. That ended then, formally ended in October. So that was a long transition period, and we understand the frustration. We understand the challenge that 2020 brought. Develop the Canton church plant. That's something we're going to be talking about it tonight quite a bit. Tim will give us a report tonight on where we're going with the Canton church plant. Paul will also address the next one where it says nurture the Houston church plant. Paul will give a report on the Houston church plant. And so we also recognize that Paul, as a part of this objective, we said that as lead pastor, I'll take primary responsibility for the church here. Paul will still have oversight for Canton and Houston. And so that's why we're moving there. The next piece we had on our strategic objective for 2020 was develop a plan to address the overcrowding here at Crosspoint. And so we have 2 points two ways actually we're addressing this. One is we're recognizing that we don't want to add a lot more seating here. We are adding more seating. It just won't be in this building. And that means that we're proposing that we start a sister church as part of that plan to address overcrowding. That also does mean, though, that we recognize the challenges out back, the nursery space that we don't have down here, the restrooms that are outdated and embarrassing sometimes. Those are pieces that we're addressing. So we'll actually talk about that as well. But those are 2 points. The building committee will bring a report actually tonight as well on that, and then continue to develop the Crosspoint online presence. That's we're working on the website. As a big part of that, though, was the YouTube being able to broadcast out, and that was and do live stream, which was crucial to have that in place before the pandemic hit. We were able to really push forward there. So how are we doing on these? Some we're doing okay. Some we might not be doing so well in. We also talked about the fact that I think Paul introduced the phrase, reach out, bring in, build up, send out. And like to push that again. How are we doing on our reaching out, bringing in, building up, and sending out? Major points in Crosspoint last year, simply, we did have the lead pastor transition. Then the virus hit in March, I think, is when we started hitting that hit. The racial tensions for this last year, tremendous. We think of George Floyd and all the other riots and race. We have a whole different vocabulary than we did a year ago. It was a tumultuous election year. It affected us, even though we're not a part of that. It affects it affects the stability of our emotional being. We are here in this country. We baptized 3 members. Lewis and Emily and Eric. We baptized them this last year. And then we added 14 members via transfers from other churches, and we had 13 baby dedications. We're growing. And so some of that growth comes from membership transfers, some comes from baby dedications, baptisms, and this is an exciting thing. We don't ever want to look at this growth and saying, this is a problem. No, this is exactly why a church exists. We want to grow so we can spread the kingdom of God out. Grab some pictures here. Virtual services from 3/8 to 5 7, that was right when it hit. It was right over spring break. If you remember, we didn't go back to school. We had the whole distance learning thing. At school, we came to, the font's big enough for y'all to see. And that we missed 11 Sundays and just did live stream. And then we hit pause on discipleship groups. We came back and had, I think, 4 services out inside here, started discipleship groups, only to have outbreak here in church. The first time we had started meeting again as discipleship groups, and then we went outside for 12 Sundays, with one Sunday being called off for weather. We had the baby dedications outside. We had we combined preparatory and communion service outside, and then we canceled the community VBS there in Baltic. So if you're feeling disconnected, this is partially why. It was a tough year, guys. It was really hard. And we can't go through a year like that and not affect us. And if we tend to think, really, it's not that big a deal. It is a big deal. This is how we do church. This is how we connect with each other. And so this was a really big deal. There we have the baby dedications. I think it's Mark and Deborah Nelly. And then on the right, we did the preparatory in small groups outside. And then we have communion down there. COVID-19, thought I would just put this in. The whole new vocabulary, we have coronavirus, the whole COVID-19. These are words we barely even thought about last year. We thought as we had pandemics, we understood what droplets were, asymptomatic, things like not only flat church, but flattening the curve, shelter in place, social distancing, quarantine. We're sick and tired of hearing these phrases. We'll look back in 20 years and we'll whoa. Drive-through testing, ventilators, vaccines, mask mandates, distance learning. A whole different vocabulary. We're reeling as a people. We're not meant to be this distant from each other. This next piece is what I'd like to, it's better up here, all right? The bottom numbers there, don't know if you can see them. We tracked our numbers, our membership numbers since we started, and the attendees numbers in the back there, while they're different than we actually, although it says, if you look at 2020 actually, 137, we do have 137 members, active members right now. The 233, you'll look around and you say, well, there's no way there's 233 people here. Those are not necessarily the attendance numbers we get Sunday mornings. Those are the numbers of people. We take all our members, their minor children, and the ones that are here regularly. So we always have some folks off. But those are, our church family has 233 members in it, right? 233 attendees right now, and 137 members. And so these are pieces that we see this growth, and this growth is substantial as you work through it. If you look down, projecting ahead, we look at 2023, 218 members and 334 attendees. We're going to have to do something, and we recognize that. This chart just shows that also a little bit. The one thing that I would like to maybe point out, and don't have anyone in particular here, but just the idea there, I put one number in here. If you look at the, there. There. So we have these right here. We have more than we ever had, that little thing right there, that's adult non-member attendees. And there are things that we recognize that those have potential to be members next year. And we're looking at this, we put a high emphasis on church membership here. And we recognize that if you're going to be connected here long term, we actually want you to be members so that we can help you and you can help us and be a part of what we're trying to do here. So we started tracking that, and that is raising, and that's not all bad. It's just that we're something we want to keep our pulse on. Sorry, I have to catch up myself with my notes here. So if you look at these numbers, you recognize that we have to do something moving forward. Crosspoint is a growing church. And this is a quote that I picked up from one of Paul's messages. It says, "The mark of a church is not in its seating capacity, but in its sending capacity. Yet the measure," so that's not the mark of a church, but the measure of a church begins not with its sending as much as with its worship. So is our worship authentic? Are we connecting? And are we pushing ahead there? several years ago, as we worked through this, we looked at the need, our current growth and our model for to try to be a discipleship church. We recognize that we need to put a lot of effort. And here again, I want to use the word intentionality into discipleship. And so we talked about what is the optimum size for, if we go back here, what is the optimum size for a congregation? And we talked and discussed, and we said, look, feels like 150 attendees or 100 is about max that we can go and still be effective in reaching the needs of everyone around us. And so that's why we're coming to you and saying, look, we know that we need to make some changes as we look forward and starting a sister church this next year. That's some of the pushing ahead for that. So we'll push into that later. We need to continue to reach out and bring in while paying a little more attention to building up and sending out. So we have the folks coming, and maybe we look at that and say, well, they're not coming like we're expecting, or we would love to see more non-Anabaptist background people come, and I agree. But we also recognize that we need to pay more attention in being strategic in building up and sending out if we want those folks to come. We have to be a little more intentional there. I threw this in here. This is one of my pet way of looking at something. It's a sigmoid curve. How many of you are familiar with a sigmoid curve? At all? All right. So it's a model that we use in organizational growth. So as we look at any kind of growth, it's what we have here is in inception, there's a high level of interest, there's a high level of enthusiasm, but when we get started, you actually recognize a bit of a drop in your energy. So Crosspointe started 8 years ago, lots of energy. We were going to do this. We had to find a building. We recognize that there's a lot of organizational structure that needs to go into place. We come through that and we actually start growing, and you see growth happen. Lots of growth happen. As it happens, you recognize that there's maturity ahead. But if you don't reach and extend that vision out, you're going to actually level out and you will decline as an organization. You see it across the board. We saw it especially in our education model in Maranatha/Legacy in the last 40 years. We needed a serious influx of energy and vision because we had leveled out, and what had started us was not enough for what we needed moving forward. So I propose to you that while we want a discipleship model church at Crosspointe, what started us will not be enough moving forward. We actually have to reach ahead and say there's something more, and propose to you that is a part of jumping ahead while we're still growing. Before we actually start declining, we need to reach out, grab something else, and say this is the next thing that we need to focus on. And we're proposing that it's becoming a sending church, recognizing that if we don't push ahead and if we don't put the idea out that if discipleship model is great, but that in and of itself is actually not going to sustain us. We actually have to have a reason why we have discipleship model church, and recognize that we need to be sending out. We need to be actively moving forward here. Becoming a sending church. So looking ahead, just practically, how does this look? Canton, Ohio, summer, fall of 2021, and Tim will bring more information here this evening, but small, close fellowship model of 3 to 5 churches is the model they're looking at there, something very similar to what Houston is doing. That's what they're projecting there. Also, recognizing that we want to start a sister congregation between 10 and 30 miles from Crosspointe, and we're proposing that happens in the summer of 2021. That means we have a very busy year ahead of us. What does that mean for the Crosspointe here? It means that we're going to have, well, I'm getting ahead of ourselves there. Other areas to consider, but that's not enough. If we want to become and keep being a sending church, we actually have to think about, and we've talked about the fact that maybe in Dover, New Philadelphia area, in 2 to 5 years, we'll need to start another congregation there. And I would love to see us put an international church plant on our 5-year calendar and say, look, let's start something somewhere outside the U.S. in the next 5 years. Because if we don't start talking about it now, we'll never get there. So we need to be very intentional moving here. Those are just things to consider here. I'd like to transition now to church culture. I love to talk about church culture. I love to talk about our school culture at school. And I put this up just to consider, so we know that we're talking about the same thing. In a river, I love this quote. It says, "A river is nature, a canal is culture." Have the picture of the river there on the left, canal there on the right. So a river is nature, a canal is culture. A raw piece of quartz is nature, an arrowhead is culture. So if you look at that idea, a river, it's untamed, it runs wild, it goes wherever it's least resistance, it's going to grow. If we want to harness that, it's actually man interacting with nature. So we have the Bible, we have the Word of God, we have human nature. It's how we interact and work that together. That becomes our church culture, if you will. So quartz, a raw piece of quartz, that's just a raw piece of quartz. It's not, it's beautiful, but it means nothing. And so you take that and to shape it into something, you have the arrowhead in the right. That's a quartz arrowhead, by the way. So you actually, when you think of our church culture, it's saying we understand the Bible, we understand our community, and we're saying this is how we're going to do church, and it's our way of doing church. It's kind of like your worldview, how you see things. This is how we actually go about interacting with those things we see. So it's the text we use, it's the slang we use. We heard a lot of that when I asked you why you came to Crosspointe. You said relationships. I heard flat church. I heard intentionality. I heard leadership. I heard those are the things that make up our church culture. And so these next little couple slides are going to be talking about some of those things here. Culture is a sum of our mission, vision, and our core values. It's the traditions we do, it's the rituals we have, it's the systems we put in place, and we think, systems? Do we have? Yeah, we have systems. We have a whole system of baptism in the class. We have new members class. We have our way of Sunday morning worship. That's a system we use. We mix that up too much, and you'll have people all bend out of shape. Don't mix it up some, and you have other people bend out of shape. So it's this idea that we actually have to work together and work through our culture. Our discipleship groups are a huge part of our culture here at Crosspointe. So I put this whole idea out here and simply said, reach out to folks in our congregation and say, what makes up our culture? I ask them the simple 4 questions that I love to do in a compass question: what is right, what is wrong, what is missing, and what is confusing. Culture is our way of doing things. Here again, culture is created by man. And here's a quote I really like. It's culture is created by man. It grows out of God's commission to have dominion over creation. It's our way of interacting what we've been given. So let's take our pulse. What is right? And I heard things like authentic worship. We have authentic worship. What is right? We have a strong discipleship emphasis. We have a willingness to discuss hard topics. That this morning, conspiracy theories, hard topics. Is it safe? It's safe to be able to do that. And we're intentional. And I think that's maybe also, you'll hear me say more about intentionality here in a minute here. Some more things I didn't put on there. It says, it seems okay to criticize and question decisions. That's a thing that's right here, and we love to see that. There's a hesitancy to change long-standing traditions. A cappella worship, intentional goal setting, and goal achievement. Takes us into the next one. What is wrong? Too big. Came like one of the first ones. It's too big. Worship is too traditional, says someone. And this last one is something that came up several times. I think I'd love to talk about. Hard to break in as an outsider. And we know that it's been a difficult year, but we actually have to do better as a church. And not only welcome those coming, but we don't recognize, we so many times have people that we connect with. We have our circle of friends, our circle of family, and we don't recognize that there may be people in our community that don't have those same connections already. It's very difficult for them. Do you understand how hard it is to leave an older Amish church and go to another church? Not only do you have to create a whole new set of friends, you actually have family that is like pushing you away. We've got to do better in this one. That when I saw that one, that just for some reason that hit a chord. I only had one that said about what is confusing, and that was the brotherhood agreement. So confusing, and I hear you, and I think we do have to work on it. But it does, because there's confusion there, I think we're seeing a lot of mixed reaction and opinions of how it should work. And I want to address that here in a minute. Something we do want to work on. What is missing? First one was, I think, was interesting. Woman input into decisions. One of our strengths at Crosspointe, I think, is our men's meetings. But it does leave a huge piece. And that means simply saying that we don't have the input from women into our decisions in congregational life. So we'd love to push into that a little bit. And how does that look while still honoring the Bible in that? And what is missing? Commitment from core members. And I'd like to just maybe go back and read a different one. I ask for a little bit of more clarification there. Here, I'll just read it. It says, as a reflection of our community and Anabaptist culture, a higher commitment or priority to family and friends than church events. They're saying there seems to be more of a higher priority to family and friends than church. It makes it very difficult for new people to come and that don't have connections or family already in church. And that's the piece that I said that is missing. More commitment from core members, I think, is what they were talking about there. And a statement, I think, that summed it up, simply say, Crosspointe is a church that is trying to break the culture of tradition in favor of a model of biblical discipleship, brotherhood, and evangelism, but still has a long way to go. Now, that's exciting. On several ways, all right? It means we're trying, and it means we're recognizing that we still have a long way to go. So if you have a long way to go and don't even see it, that's actually really, really bad. And so I'm saying this is something that we need to look at, but we recognize that we need to keep pushing forward here. Reach out. Do we have effective ministries that reaches out to the community? That's, I think, an area of weakness for us. We had our vacation Bible school last year. We have the Thanksgiving meal, but that's really the only, other than, of course, the nursing home was canceled with everything this last year with COVID, but those are the kind of the only three pieces. We have good connections with James preached several Sundays. I think Myron preached once for our neighbors down here at the United Church of Christ, which I think is really good. But those are pieces I think I'd love to see more interaction. Are we being intentional about bringing in members that will continue to build our church and be available for Christian service? Because that's really, if we want to bring people in, then we need to work just as hard as building them up and equipping them to send out. Are our teaching programs and ministry adequately nurturing church members in Christian growth? How are our discipleship groups doing? Is our teaching program missing key doctrines? There may be. Maybe there's some big gaps that you're saying, look, we actually have to push in on this. Things that we need to work on. Send out. Are we intentional on a church level in sending out workers for the kingdom? One of the things that kind of bothers me sometimes is this idea that our outreach that is happening is more individual than corporate. If you understand what I'm saying, there's people that they feel a call to go here, and they'll come to the church and say, I feel this call, and we say, yep, great, you go, we'll bless you. And that's great. I love to see that. But I would love to see more intentionality as a church level, say, look, we actually think you would do great here. We just tap someone on the shoulder and say, look, this is what we need to be pushing into. So those are areas just I think that I want to be able to just have a look at. The other thing that this is intended to do is to evaluate if our lifestyle practices are in alignment with our brotherhood agreement. And so there's some areas of concern I'd like to push into here. The first one here is current political climate blurs the distinction between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of this world. We've come through a really tough time. And I want to just be very careful and say, look, we do believe in a two-kingdom theology, and let's practice it. It's so easy to get caught up. And I don't know that I'm going to push more into it, but that's an area of concern that we have as we look into this. Another area of concern is, are we intentional about the media intake and content? Remember back in January, we talked about the worldview of this age and the tsunami that is coming or that is out there. There is a huge push for us to think like them. Just like Paul talked about that the administration, one of the first acts he did was to change that. Biden signed in the law to change so that the gender fluidity. And it is out there, I get it. But we do have to make sure that we stay disconnected from that system enough that we don't start thinking like that. The sexual content of especially the online and media intake and content, those are things we need to watch. The numbing effect against the wickedness of sin and alternate lifestyles. I think that's something we continually have to push into. I'd like to read here in Romans 11. Well, we'll get to that later. Okay. The other thing we like to put up there, just the jewelry and modesty. We've talked together as a church and said this is something that's an area of concern. It's been on our agenda for the last 3 years. And I want to just put a plea out there, guys, and say, look, let's not slide into a decision. If we make a decision to change some of where we're at, that's fine, let's do that. But let's do it together, and let's not just slide into a decision where all of a sudden we have to make adjustments to our lifestyle and practice because of where we're already at. So let's be intentional, and let's make sure that the changes we make are based on rational thought and not just connecting with the people around us. Romans 11:33 to 12:2, it says, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgment and how inscrutable his ways! For who has known the mind of the Lord, and who has been his counselor? Or who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen." Then he goes on, he says, "I appeal to you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." I'd like to highlight that last phrase. We all have in our minds an idea of what is good, what is acceptable, and what is perfect. Let's make sure that that drives our decision making in these areas. If we are thinking through, and if we're being intentional, and if we as fathers are taking the lead and saying, look, is that what we want? Is that what is good and intentional and good and acceptable and perfect? If that's where we go and that's how we make our decisions, then I think we're going to be okay. But if we slide into decisions by default, by not taking leadership, and then we're going to recognize that we have nothing to offer a society that is just like us. Our biggest challenge is not in how we dress and what we decide to put on. It's our ideology. It's how we think. The idea that we can somehow think like the people around us and be effective in ministry will simply not work. What is good and acceptable and perfect? Unless, and we had talked about this earlier again, this was talking about the worldview of this age. I'm going to quote Peter Bergen here again. And he says, he's a sociologist on the East Coast, and he talks about, he says, unless a theologian is someone that studies religion, says, unless a theologian has the inner fortitude of a desert saint, he has only one effective remedy against the threat of cognitive collapse in the face of these pressures. These pressures were, and he is not a Christian, Peter Bergen's not, but he simply says, the society is changing so much and pushing their ideas on you. And unless we have the inner fortitude of a desert saint, there's only one way we're going to respond. It says, he must huddle together with like-minded fellow deviants and huddle very closely indeed. And we are those fellow deviants, if you will. As someone that doesn't conform to the norm. He goes on. He says, only in a counter community of considerable strength does cognitive deviance have a chance to maintain itself. And my simple statement is this: Crosspointe is a community of considerable strength. We have what it takes to withstand the tsunami of moral defilement. That comes from a quote from Stephen Brubaker. I just changed the Anabaptist to Crosspointe. It says, for mobilizing a reverse tsunami of Christ followers that fill the earth with the kingdom of God. So last Sunday, Tim talked about essentially the creation mandate and how God said, look, go out and change the world by living among them and pushing the kingdom of God out. That's how we do it. That's how we change society. We don't change it by voting for a different administration. But guess what? In 4 years or in 8 years, someone else will come in, and with the stroke of a pen, they'll change a lot of the progress. We think progress. It's by changing people's minds and hearts in a reverse tsunami. Looking ahead, I'm going to, actually looking ahead, Crosspoint, Canton Church, this is tonight. We'll talk about this. Canton Church, Tim R. Miller family has been granted a release to go there. The sister church will be asking for a release and a corresponding leadership charge for Sean to lead the sister church. And then it also will look to the building committee to give us an update on the church house renovations. And then a communion is Easter Sunday, April 4th. That's on a p.m. Deacon ordination, April 18th. This is this year. And minister ordination, October 17th, 2021. The deacon ordination we're proposing happens before the sister church. Simply saying we'll have deacon ordination, and if that person goes with, that's a blessing. He'll be deacon there, or if he stays here, that's fine. He'll be here. So we'll be coming to you and looking for church action, or we'll ask you to approve, or we'll put a proposal out there, and then a minister ordination on later. One of the challenge that I think we have, let me just go back here. Actually, we'll be done there. Is simply the idea that we have to. We tend to think that we have to know a lot to actually change the world, and we really don't. We buried my dad 2.5 weeks ago. Dad was not an expert theologian. He wasn't necessarily a really good public speaker. But he touched a tremendous amount of people. And he touched those people by just caring for them. He was a chaplain for years. And I'm always thinking of the quote by John Piper when I think of Dad. I'm going to read this. It says, "You don't need to know a lot of things in order to make a huge difference for the Lord in this world. But you do need to know a few things that are great and be willing to live and die for them." People that make a difference in this world are not people who have mastered a lot of things. They are people who have been mastered by very few things that are very, very great. What are we mastered by? Are we mastered by something big enough? So what causes you anxiety? That may be a clue to what's mastering you. One of the biggest fears that I have as I look at Crosspoint is a thought that making a generational shift in how we think hasn't even crossed our minds. We really don't care sometimes if our life makes a big difference in the world. We want to just be liked, have a good job, have good vacations, have all our family around us when we retire, grow old easy, no hell. But the reality is we have to think much deeper than that. We have to push ahead and say that we have to pay attention to the world around us and recognize that if we're going to make a difference, and we're going to have to be sold out, totally sold out for God. I'm excited about where we're at as a church. I'm also terrified, not by what's in here, but recognizing that the forces around us are incredibly manipulative in how they cause us to think. But we have this promise that greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world. And we can live as conquerors. We can live as victors. I am excited, looking forward. And I know that this year is going to be a big year, but we're going to be able to, by the grace of God, move the kingdom of God forward. Tonight's service starts at 6:30. Come praying, and we'll have a lot on the agenda. It's going to be much more of a... We'll try to have, if you have questions, and we'll try to do the format in a way that we interact with each other. This is not members only. It's for anyone that has an interest in Crosspoint or want to be here. So come tonight, and we'll just want to talk about practical ways that this looks moving forward, how the year ahead of us looks. So, any questions or comments from anyone?